Welcome to a better listening experience. You've just rediscovered The Quiet Storm, the best music and more variety. KBLX, 1400 AM and 102.9 FM.
No toxins, no pollution. People living in glass houses. If you suffer from allergies, maybe you should visit the cleanest little town in Texas on 2020 Friday.
Joining us again live from Kuwait City is ABC's Forrest Sawyer, along with a member of the Kuwaiti resistance. I would like to talk, first of all, however, to Forrest. I gather that you and the doctor went through some of the city morgues today, and you have some video of that. Can you hear me now, Forrest?
Ted, actually, well, I think we have a little technical problem. I'm hearing the control room. I think we have a switch that's thrown open in the controls. So if we could take care of that, I'll be able to hear. There we are.
I'll tell you what, let's see if you can hear me. If not, we'll just play it by ear and let the control room cue you. Can you hear me now?
We've taken care of it, Ted.
I was just saying that you and the doctor with you went to some of the city morgues today to examine some of the evidence, the terribly grim evidence of what happened to some of the resistance fighters who were captured by the Iraqis. And I would like you, if you would, to tell us what it is that we're looking at, Forrest, and I should warn our audience at home, much of this is obviously very grim material.
Well, I believe that you're probably looking at the video that we took inside the morgue. We went down to visit it. They're trying to compile evidence, Ted, of the atrocities so that in the future people will know what has happened, and if there is a legal case, if there do happen to be war crimes, they will be able to present this hard evidence. These are torture victims that were beaten about the body, as the doctor will tell you, about the head, and usually killed with a bullet wound. And the doctor with whom I am standing is one of a very small group in this particular hospital who hid a camera inside the hospital and then risked his life by going down to the morgue and taking pictures, which you'll be able to see in just a moment, of these torture victims so that there would be a record of their lives and their deaths, and we would be able to tell the world about it.
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we, at the same time that we're looking at the photographs, ask the doctor to tell us what it was that he saw and what kind of treatment he had to administer to people. In other words, what kinds of injuries, what kinds of wounds did these people have after they were brought to the hospital from after interrogation by the Iraqi authorities?
Actually, the pattern that was done is that they start torture people by simply beating them. So the beating marks are full on their bodies. Then they start to extract their nail fingers. They have cigarette burns, and then they start to more severe status where they start to cut arms or legs or ears. In some cases they extract the eyes, and the worst was like in the case of the girl we spoke about, they put an axe on the head and they cut it into two halves. And in few cases they also cut the genital areas. I'm aware of 2 cases in such a situation. They even don't bring them to the hospital. They take them and throw them immediately in front of their families' houses, in front of their mothers.
Doctor, the evidence that we're seeing right now, and of course what you were telling us, is almost grotesque beyond words, but I wonder if you can also give us a sense of what the scope was in terms of numbers of people. We have heard such vastly differing numbers from your experience, from your own personal experience, and from what you have heard from others who actually saw this kind of evidence. Do you have any sense of how many people were held and treated like this?
Actually, I would say the numbers of executed people, tortured and then executed, wouldn't be more than hundreds. It's only hundreds. But those who were captured and tortured and then sent out or thrown to their families again, that would be more than thousands. That's definite.
Now, this is, I don't know whether you can even begin to answer this question, but in the light of what we have just seen and what you have been telling us, I find it difficult to believe that the Iraqis who are now being held are not the objects of some kind of revenge. What is the attitude of the people who are now holding, and I'm speaking now of the Kuwaitis who are now holding Iraqi prisoners of war?
I would be more specific about the feeling of Kuwaitis, actually. I can speak to you, for example, about the treatment we are giving to the POWs in the hospital, let's say, or we call them patients, actually. They are getting the maximum, the best treatment we have. We can give it even to Kuwaitis or others. They are getting 3 meals, they are getting water, and they took showers even. At the time, you reporters don't have a shower even. The other POWs in the streets, all are being gathered as prisoners. I'm not aware of a single case brought tortured yet to the hospital in the past 3 or 4 days from the Iraqis. So yet I haven't seen... Yeah.
Let me interrupt you just for 1 second, because if the audience at home is seeing breakup on the picture from Kuwait City, I want you to understand the power, of course, is being generated by a portable generator there, and we are having some difficulties. It's not a problem that you're experiencing at home. It's just a problem in the signal from Kuwait City. Doctor, let me now move on to ask you about some of those who collaborated with the Iraqis. To what degree did either Kuwaitis or some of the other nationalities who were residents in Kuwait during the war, to what degree did they collaborate with the Iraqi authorities?
There were very few people who collaborated with the Iraqis, but there were Kuwaitis, there were non-Kuwaitis. I wouldn't specify.
What about the health conditions and what is likely to happen because you don't have running water, because you don't have electricity? What do you estimate is going to be the immediate danger in terms of the population in Kuwait City and throughout the rest of Kuwait, for that matter?
For the population of Kuwait present at the time being in Kuwait, and at this point of time, actually, we'll run into some problems with water because of some sterilization and steam and for operation. But I think we have this problem only for the last couple of days only. But they are bringing water tanks and everything. I think we'll have no problem with that in the coming 24 or 48 hours to survive at least in a good shape. I wouldn't say normally, but in a good shape, an acceptable health and good shape.
All right, Doctor, thank you very much for joining us. Faris Sawyer, again, thank you for being with us this morning. Tonight, back in the States, we will look, when we come back, at the battlefield as hostilities came to an end today. The mechanics of ending a war take a little time. The ceasefire is in place, and senior Allied officers will meet, as I mentioned earlier, with their Iraqi counterparts to go over the fine print. But out in the desert, ABC's John Lawrence reports on the human reaction as the soldiers who fought the war learned that their job would soon be over.
On the 4th and final day of the land battle, American soldiers from the 3rd Armored Division moved across the Iraqi desert, attacking a unit of the Republican Guard. It was no contest. Tactical air support allowed the Americans to stand off, out of range of the Iraqi tank guns, and pound them into submission. It is one of the reasons for the low number of casualties on the Allied side of the war. Some of the American soldiers in the war say they expected the Iraqis to put up a tougher fight. Those who did not run away were killed or captured. One GI said the 4-day battle against the Iraqis was less difficult than some of the peacetime training exercises they'd been through. Still, the ceasefire was welcome. This morning, some of the troops from 3rd Brigade got the good news from ABC News correspondent Jim Wooten.
2 hours, this thing is over. In 2 hours, it's over. Who said that? President Bush. It's on the radio? No, man, in 2 hours it's over. In 2 hours it's over. Yeah! Woo! That's what I'm trying to with that. I don't know if you can say that. That's all right. Okay. Do you have what's going on? It's the suspend military operations at 8 o'clock. What happened to the Republican Guard, if you know anything? I think you guys pretty well did the Republican Guard in yesterday. And they're through. They're through. That's all right. That's all right. Hey, Mom, get the beer ready, because I'm coming home. Hey, did you know, in about 2 hours, this thing is over. All over.
Don't tell me news that it's not true.
No, it's true.
Can't tell me. 2 hours, it's over. Come here, this is ABC over here.
Come here, you talk to us.
That's great. Is it true? I don't want to get my hopes up. I've been dreaming too long. Oh, God.
After 4 days of fighting, there was time today to clean up, but not to relax, with Saddam Hussein still in power.
Ready to go home? We are you? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, ready to go home.
Put that away.
Say again?
Put the ammunition away.
And we ain't gonna put it away. We're gonna just have it on ready if we need it, just in case. On standby. You never know what might come up.
Sounds like you don't trust him.
No, he ain't the most trustworthy guy in the world right now. Not with America anyway. He's not in my book yet. They get a little mad, but we did what we had to do, did what we were told to do. You know, and if it come down to it, we'll go back out and do it again.
If you really want my opinion, I think we should totally eliminate his army. I mean, totally eliminate him. Because if he continues to have an army, then he continues to be a threat somewhere. And I don't want my children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren coming back to this region and fighting against Iraq again. That's how I feel.
You always told me he had bad feet. Look at him. No, sir. How y'all doing?
Fine. How was it going?
Isn't peace wonderful?
It's great.
Too bad it couldn't have come sooner.
I want to watch those people more, huh?
Oh, really? They hurt Dr. Scholes. Square them away. Really? Company! Oh, Terrence Hunt.
And with the ceasefire, it was back to the more regular routine of Army life. But emotions were closer to the surface.
You are some of the finest soldiers I've ever served with in 17 years in the Army. You're all a great bunch of gentlemen, and I'm very happy that that we've come through. You think I'm kidding because of the way I treat you, I know. But I'm serious that we came through this thing all right, and I want to take every one of you home. And we only lost one soldier yesterday.
One of the differences between here and Vietnam is the unit cohesiveness. That you do have a unit here rather than volunteers, yes, but you live together, kids go to school together, etc. Does that really make a difference in combat?
Yeah, there's another side to this war that you don't see. It's going on back where we live in Germany. Makes a hell of a lot of difference. The other part of it is we have been together. This is a mature brigade. We've been together as a brigade pretty much consistently since I took command summer before last, about 16, 17 months ago. The same key people.
With the end of the war and the beginning of the peace, American and Allied troops can now start giving the desert back to those who live here and think about going home themselves. John Lawrence for Nightline, Tehran.
It has been one of the bizarre aspects of this war that even as we have been covering it from the coalition side, so too we have been able on an almost nightly basis to be in touch with ABC correspondent Bill Blakemore in the enemy's capital, in Baghdad. Bill Blakemore joins us again live from there tonight. And Bill, I guess I have to begin as I do every evening with you by asking you quite simply, what have you been able to hear, what have you been able to learn in Baghdad, because obviously it is very limited.
Well, actually, we've had remarkable access to wander around the capital throughout the last 3 weeks. And yesterday for us, the first day of the ceasefire, we wandered through a number of neighborhoods and found an enormous sense of relief in everybody we talked to. However, there had not yet been any kind of reports, even on Voice of America or BBC, about what Iraqi casualties might be. I suspect that with the day that's beginning here now, the second day of the ceasefire, those reports which we've begun to hear on the BBC this morning will begin to filter through the population here, and people will be doing more reassessing of just how serious Iraqi casualties might be.
Perhaps more importantly, Bill, than reports of casualties, is whether indeed there has been any public concession by the Iraqi authorities that this is a war that they have lost. Because I must tell you, we're beginning to hear reports coming out of Iraq that there's still sort of belligerent chest-beating kind of talk coming out of there. Which are you hearing?
Oh, well, we have the few official announcements which have been made have in no sense talked about being defeated. They've been talking about the opposite. They say that Iraq was victorious, that in fact on the last day of battle, according to one of the official announcements yesterday, Iraq had given the Allies such a beating that had caused them to decide they should stop fighting. In fact, this is a line that's not exactly new, because they've been saying it from the beginning of the war, and many Iraqis we've talked to as well said it was one country holding out against 28. We knew that ultimately, militarily, it wouldn't be viable, but it was heroic for that reason to make a point. That's in general what we're hearing, certainly from the official line and from some of the Iraqis we've talked to.
But it would be accurate to say that by no stretch of the imagination is there a feeling that there was anything approaching an unconditional surrender.
That's right. I mean, well, what they're saying is they did not surrender because Saddam Hussein had started talking about offering to pull out 10 days ago. The logic in terms of public relations, as it was presented here, was we've offered to pull out, it was rejected by America, but now we're going to do it anyway. However, people here listen to the radio broadcasts from many countries. There are no illusions here about what the general military situation was, and people know that they now have a period of reassessment. In fact, walking around some of the neighborhoods yesterday, it was not possible to tell what the real political feelings of some of the older people, some of the adults might be. That's something for the coming days, I suspect, as more realities begin to sink in.
Bill, one last question, and that is, it has been a fact of life for you and all the others reporting from Iraq that whenever you report live, there has been an official, usually from the Ministry of Information there. Is that still the case?
Yes, it is. Indeed, it is.
And to what degree has there ever been any kind of interference, or perhaps after the case, a suggestion that they wished you'd said something a little bit different? And again, I realize even by putting that question to you right now, it may be difficult for you to respond.
Right. Well, in fact, I can only speak for myself, but it isn't difficult for me to respond. Oddly enough, from the beginning of the time I came in here, about 3 weeks ago, I've never had anything like that. There was a very clear understanding from the beginning that they didn't want us to talk about anything that might have military strategic significance, and there's never been any complaint about anything I've said otherwise, because I just made sure that I didn't say anything that might strike me as being militarily strategic. So, in fact, we've had a very, I would call it an easygoing relationship, because that was clear. In fact, some of the people who have been working for the Ministry of Information in their normal jobs are journalists, and so to a certain degree, there was a professional common language among us.
All right, Bill Blakemore, thank you very much again. When we come back, I'll report on burning oil wells in Kuwait and how that forced us. 3 o'clock this afternoon. A line of Kuwaiti fighter jets, each bearing what was until a few days ago a rallying cry and is now a promise fulfilled. The afternoon is balmy and bright. We're aboard a Royal Saudi Air Force helicopter bound for Kuwait City. We head north up the west coast of the Persian Gulf toward the Saudi-Kuwaiti border. While we are still more than 100 miles from the border, we see the first black slicks of oil coagulating along the coastline. Streaks at first, black lines in the turquoise water. Then thick fingers of oil pushed toward inlets by the tide. This is one continuing catastrophe of war unaffected by ceasefire announcements. The further north we fly, the wider and heavier the oil slicks become, until in places there is only a shining, iridescent blanket reflecting the afternoon sun. The day seems to change, the sky turning from blue to gray. A veil of smoke and oily soot is being pushed by a 20-knot headwind from north to south across the sun. The further north we fly, the darker it gets. Without radar, helicopter pilots are under orders not to fly when they have less than 2 to 3 miles visibility. Some 20 miles south of the Kuwaiti border, it's as though we'd flown into a fog bank. Visibility is down to 500 meters. The pilot makes an emergency landing at an Aramco installation. The sun, as you can see, is still high in the sky. It is late afternoon, but we are more than an hour and a half from sunset. Still, our helicopter mission into Kuwait City has been aborted because the visibility, because of smoke fires, oil fires that are blowing into Saudi Arabia from Kuwait, that visibility is so bad that the pilot feels it is unsafe to continue. There is a radio tower just about 500 meters behind me. You cannot see it because of the impenetrability of the smoke. The oil fires from burning wellheads inside Kuwait are so thoroughly screening the sun that the temperature has dropped a good 15 degrees. Drivers have turned on their headlights. It's beginning to look like night, although it's only 4:30 in the afternoon. By 5, more than half an hour before sunset, it is chilly along the Saudi-Kuwaiti border, and it is dark. When we come back, we'll be joined by the science advisor to King Hussein of Jordan, a man who first warned about what the environmental impact of this war could be. Before began, Abdullah Toukan, the science advisor to King Hussein of Jordan, warned us of the environmental damage that would flow out of the Gulf War. He joins us now live from the Jordanian capital of Amman. Dr. Toukan, is it as bad or worse than you thought it would be, and perhaps you can quantify it for us?
Certainly. First of all, as you know, this has just been going on for the fires for about 10 days now, maybe. And the beginning of it is showing me that it can be as horrifying as we anticipated. The cloud and soot of smoke that we are seeing is certainly quite thick, as you've just described to us. It can get larger and larger, and with the northwesterly winds prevailing in that region, it could certainly move it down to the southeast region over the Gulf states and Iran and maybe even to the Indian subcontinent. But again, I must emphasize that it's still the first 10 days. If the fires continue for about a month or two, then we will really be talking about disaster, because everything is accumulative over here.
Now, we experienced ourselves today the temperature dropping. Indeed, it is a very chilly morning here in Riyadh, even though we're about 250 miles south from the closest of those oil fires, I would think. And I'm not sure if the audience can see it behind me, but the sky is sort of streaked with gray, and that, too, is evidence of some of the smoke that is winding its way down into Saudi Arabia now. What is going to happen beyond the cooling effect, and what will simply the impenetrability of that smoke mean in terms of rainfall for the region?
Yes, sir. Well, to start with, there's a lot of chemicals that are emitted with the burning. The most important parts of them is the sulfur dioxide, the nitrogen oxides. These, if they combine with any water droplets, will come down as acid rain. And acid rain will certainly ruin the vegetation and the soil of the region. So first of all, you have you've got the... Sorry.
Forgive me for interrupting you. We're down to about our last 30 or 40 seconds. What is the impact of the falling temperatures going to have on this region?
Oh, okay, sir. Well, obviously, the falling temperatures there will also devastate the agricultural produce, the livestock, and might cause famine and reduce all that in the region. And if it goes down to the Indian subcontinent as well, and if it moves along, it can perturb the monsoon rains, the seasons, because of the variation of temperatures between the continents and the ocean. And there we have hundreds of millions of lives depending on it.
Dr. Toukan, I'm sure that we're going to be talking about this subject with you and with other specialists over the course of the next few months. I thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'll be back with a final note after this.
This is KPLX.
KPIX Eyewitness News at noon.
Good afternoon, I'm Bob Holman. Topping our news. Well, we're all happy it's been raining here. In Kuwait City, they're happy to see the sunshine. It's out for the first time since the Iraqis left town. The sunshine and the coming of new American ambassador had people in the capital celebrating in the streets for the third day in a row. Ron McEwen sets the scene in Kuwait City.
There was another siege of the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait City today, this time by thankful Kuwaitis, and the reason was peace, not war. Inside the compound, the new American ambassador arrived by helicopter. Edward Ghanim speaks Arabic and is a specialist in Middle Eastern affairs. He replaces Nathaniel Howell, who held out here with his staff for weeks after the invasion by Iraq, with no electricity and drinking water from the embassy swimming pool.
It's an exciting day in my own life. I'm just delighted to be here and be back. I want you to know I was ready to come in August, and the Iraqis got here first.
The new ambassador's first act was to raise Old Glory, in fact, the very flag which flew over the American compound when the embassy finally was closed. It is now flying again here in Kuwait.
That was Bob McEwen reporting from Kuwait City. Here at home, President Bush has won high marks for the way he handled the war. This morning, he pledged to work just as hard for securing the peace. At the top of his diplomatic agenda, the release of American POWs. He said he thinks Baghdad will move quickly on that. He said the first talks with the Iraqis will be held tomorrow.
General Khalid, General Schwarzkopf, and other coalition military leaders of our forces in the Gulf will meet with representatives of Iraq tomorrow afternoon, March 2nd, in the Theater of Operations to discuss the return of POWs and other military matters related to the ceasefire. We will not discuss the location of the meeting for obvious security reasons, but this is an important step in securing the victory that our forces have achieved. They know that they must comply, and I believe they will comply. And put it this way, they better comply.
Mr. Bush also thanked the American people for the affection and support they've been giving to the troops. At an earlier speech today, he said that we'd kicked the Vietnam syndrome for once and for all. Well, the soldiers returning from the Gulf will get a much different welcome than the soldiers who returned from Vietnam. This group of American warriors is being viewed as heroes, and for some of them, their heroes' welcome may come sooner rather than later. The brass isn't given any firm dates, but they say some forces will be coming home in the next couple of weeks. It would take at least 6 months to complete the pullout. Iraqi soldiers are facing a much different fate. Their performance on the battlefield now marked by destroyed military armor and fallen comrades. Peter Van Zandt saw the remains of the Iraqi war effort on his journey to Kuwait City along a highway of destruction.
On Ring Road number 4, leading into Kuwait City, lies the remains of Saddam Hussein's military folly. Tanks, trucks, and other military vehicles litter the road. Unused grenades, mortar rounds, and ammunition left behind as the Iraqis ran for their lives. There are also dead Iraqi soldiers strewn about the roadway, undoubtedly killed in an air attack. Kuwaitis are venturing back on this road to see the destruction and experience the satisfaction of seeing their tormentors' dead bodies.
I think they got what they deserve. You mentioned to me they were animals, but they were not animals. This is an insult to think that they are animals. They are something I cannot explain, not a human being.
Closer to Kuwait City on Ring Road 4, thousands of Kuwaitis line up for gasoline. During the occupation, only vehicles with Iraqi license plates were allowed fuel, and most of these people refused to make the change. While we were taping, the crowd recognized we were Americans and started a victory celebration. The joy is everywhere in Kuwait City as people begin rebuilding their lives. The days of terror are over.
Victory now belongs to the Allied forces, but it appeared easy, perhaps too easy. Mike Hegedus reports on what it took for American and Allied troops to take out the million-man army.
It wasn't supposed to be this easy. Going in, we were told Iraq was a battle-hardened, formidable foe with the 4th largest army in the world. Wrong.
I don't know where they got this figure of the Iraqi military being the 4th largest military in the world.
It really is a 3rd world army, and I don't say that in a denigrating way.
I'd put Iraq about 9 or 10 on a good day.
So how did we get the wrong idea to begin with? I seem to remember these fellas telling us.
The duty of the military planner is to assume the worst and hope for the best. That's the way you plan military campaigns. At the same time, there clearly was some lowballing and puffery going on in the administration.
So it turns out we beat an army that in truth was nowhere near a match. And we beat it because it was led by someone who, it turns out, was a military imbecile.
Our military had 5 months to put together a battle plan that was very specifically directed toward targets, the locations of which we knew very clearly through satellite technology and also the fact that Saddam Hussein fixed his forces down here. All those things contributed to this kind of a victory.
And given all that time, the plan we came up with pounded the dickens out of those fixed forces from the air and then encircled and squeezed the rest of the juice out of them on the ground. All of it done with better weapons and a better trained and motivated army.
And I'll tell you, this is the best army that I ever saw in 31 years. This is the best one.
But we also won because we smartened up. Lessons we learned after Vietnam and lessons from General Norman Schwarzkopf's childhood.
Out of Vietnam and the wars before it came the Goldwater-Nichols bill in the mid-1980s. You never heard of it. But what it did was set up a mechanism by which the next war, this one, in the field, there would be one commander, one guy in charge.
You don't find the Navy competing with the Air Force competing with the Army competing with the Marines about who is going to do this or do that. One person gives the orders, and those orders are followed, and it worked beautifully.
Extraordinary move.
The guy in charge turned out to be General Norman Schwarzkopf, nicknames aside, a solid soldier, a man particularly well-suited for this war in this part of the world.
His father, who was a general, had been stationed in Iran in a military advisory capacity, and I obviously, as a youngster, Schwarzkopf learned a great deal about the Mideast and about Islamic culture, and I think it certainly paid off.
And being sensitive to Arab needs on both sides helped keep the coalition together, vital to success. And a military success is what it turned out to be.
Thank you, boss.
In San Francisco, Mike Hegedus, Channel 5. Eyewitness News.
Thank you.
Well, as military experts are analyzing the keys to the Allied victory, Radio Baghdad is still claiming it was Iraq that won the war. Saddam Hussein's photograph looks out from the cover of morning newspapers as always. Almost everything else has changed. People in the capital once again free to go about their daily lives without fear of bombs falling from the sky. Many families who'd moved out of Baghdad during the war are returning to the city. It will take years to repair all the damage. In Jordan, people are not willing to forget those Allied bombs. Thousands of demonstrators took to the street in Amman shouting anti-American slogans. The majority of Jordan's people are Palestinians. They see Saddam Hussein as a hero. Jordan's King Hussein said yesterday that his 3 million subjects sympathized with, quote, our Iraqi brothers nursing their wounds and pain. So where is Saddam Hussein? No one's seen him. A French newspaper reported that he's seeking asylum in Algeria. However, Algeria's foreign office is denying that report. Of course, our State Department is checking out the report, but so far, no confirmation at all. Saddam Hussein's troops have been accused of committing all manner of atrocities during the occupation of Kuwait. More illustrations today of just how desperate Kuwaitis were in those dark days. This young woman, who did not want to give her name, spoke to British reporter Sandy Gall. She was a nurse in Kuwait City when the Iraqi army moved in. She said she killed Iraqi soldiers in her care.
I don't need them. I give them injections. Kill them.
To kill them?
Yes.
Did you kill any?
Yes. Maybe 18 or 22 in the hospital. I have chance to kill them in the hospital.
How did you do it?
With the injection.
The woman is 24 years old.
I have the...
She said she killed the Iraqis in the name of the Kuwaiti resistance. Still ahead on Eyewitness News, Marlon Brando in a real-life court drama involving his son, and how people in Marin County are coping with the new water rationing of just 50 gallons a day per person. And arraignment in the Mitchell brothers.
We are not on a witch hunt, or we are not on a hunt. Let me retract witch hunt. We are not on a hunt for Saddam Hussein. We haven't been directed to do that. The president said that he has to face international justice at some point, but he has not given any instructions to us to...
But you would not let him leave, would you?
If we found out that he was leaving and we knew about it, I would turn it over to my boss and say, what do you want me to do? We are capable of doing anything you want.
The United Nations Security Council is scheduled to consider a resolution to continue the arms embargo against Iraq today. The U.S. is also circulating a draft resolution to authorize the resumption of combat if Iraq fails to comply with all peace terms. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney also warned Iraq against failure to comply. He said, "We have the ability to resume hostilities at a moment's notice. The lights are out in Baghdad, and they'll stay out until we get satisfaction." The leadership of Congress today invited President Bush to address a joint session next Wednesday night. House Speaker Tom Foley and Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell told the president the Congress wanted to extend its respect to him and offer congratulations for his leadership during the war. Judy?
Iraq had its own demand today that all foreign forces leave the country immediately. Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz said American tanks and troops were still in place near the southern Iraqi city of Nasiriyah, and he accused them of acting in a provocative manner. Meanwhile, in Baghdad, the focus was on rebuilding. We have a report from Edward Stewarton of Independent Television News. It was cleared by Iraqi censors.
The message delivered to Iraqis at prayer this morning was very similar to that being put out in official comments on the radio and in the newspapers. The message here, too, that Iraq has emerged from the conflict victorious. The Imam here said that it had all been planned by God, that the world was now talking about the Palestinian question because of what Iraq had done. But as those who left Baghdad during the 6 weeks of bombing return, the minds of many people here are concentrated on immediate practical questions, not the long-term political implications of the crisis. More shops are opening, but there's still no power and no piped water. The principal concern of many here now is how long it will take to restore the city's services.
We'd like our country to be reconstructed again and to get back to where we started from. We want to live like other people live.
Iraqis have still been given no word from their government about the number of casualties their forces sustained, and almost everyone here is now waiting for news of a relation or friend who was at the front.
Exiled Kuwaiti citizens jammed the roads into their capital city today. We have a report on the rebuilding task they will face from Jonathan Monroe of Independent Television News.
The reconstruction of Kuwait is reckoned to be a 5-year job. Most of the country's infrastructure has gone. Like many other strategic buildings, the country's telephone exchange is all but destroyed, the clearing up yet to start. The building was mortar-bombed by the Iraqis in the first full day of their occupation and further destroyed before their hasty pull-out. Most lines are cut, international calls impossible.
AT&T said it was sending equipment to Kuwait City that would make it possible to place some international calls by Sunday. The Kuwait Oil Company said all Kuwait's 950 oil wells were damaged by the Iraqis or Allied bombing. Company officials said most of the wells were exploded by Iraqi troops in the last days of the war. They also said Kuwait has about a 16-day supply of oil on hand for domestic consumption.
There were continued celebrations in the liberated Kuwaiti capital today. The United States and Great Britain formally reclaimed their embassies. Roger Mudd narrates cool reports that include some graphic pictures of the devastation that marked the final phase of the war, as well as events today in Kuwait City.
The American flag is flying once again at the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait City. It was the same flag which the American ambassador took with him when he and his staff evacuated the embassy on December 13th after the Iraqis had cut off water, food, and electricity. The flag-raising ceremony today came amidst a continuing celebration by the Kuwaitis, who are still expressing their appreciation to the American-led forces which liberated their country 3 days ago. They did so as they began to rebuild their country, which was ravaged by 7 months of Iraqi occupation. Kuwaitis formed long lines to get gasoline. The good news was there is no gasoline shortage.
The gasoline itself is not in short demand. We have opened 3 stations yesterday. We added 2 more stations today, so we have a total of 5 stations. Every Kuwaiti is allowed to go and take 40 liters of gasoline free of charge.
Meanwhile, the highway leading west out of Kuwait City remained almost impassable, littered with the twisted, charred remains of vehicles used by Iraqi soldiers trying to escape advancing Allied forces earlier this week. They drove tanks, armored personnel carriers, as well as luxury cars, pickup trucks, and school buses, anything that would move them in the direction of home. But a massive U.S. air attack, targeting both ends of the convoy, cut off their escape, trapping thousands in a 3-mile-long fireball. The swiftness of the attack was evident. The bodies of many soldiers were found still in their vehicles.
Take it real slow, take engineers, be very methodical. Doesn't have to all be completed today.
Marines from the 2nd Division have spent the last few days trying to ferret out those Iraqi soldiers who may have escaped on foot. Despite the ceasefire, the Iraqis continued to put up resistance.
We think we're dealing with just some people that haven't gotten the word that hostilities have ceased, and they're basically people that have not given up like the rest of the Iraqi army did.
The Marines used loudspeakers to coax some of the Iraqis to surrender. On others, they had to use force. Some were members of the Iraqi Special Forces unit known as the Red Beret. The Kuwaitis claim the Red Berets are responsible for many of the atrocities inside Kuwait City and believe that if they surrendered, they were certain to be executed.
2 more U.S. soldiers were killed by Iraqi landmines today. They were an Army doctor and a medical specialist who stopped to deal with a group of surrendering Iraqi soldiers. The doctor was killed when his vehicle hit a landmine. The specialist died when she stepped on a mine as she tried to come to his aid.
Jordan's King Hussein appeared to reach out today to the U.S. and to Arab nations unhappy with his sympathy for Iraq during the war. In a speech to his nation, he said, "Jordan throws its arms open wide to all those who wish to establish friendly relations based on mutual respect and cooperation." President Bush said he had no personal animosity toward the king, but he said the U.S. did have some differences with Jordan that would take time to work out. Kuwait responded with a blistering attack on the king. It said he could not be trusted, and it accused him of helping Iraq capture the emirate in August.
In economic news, President Bush is first tonight. He went into the White House briefing room today to talk with reporters about U.S. diplomatic efforts in the Middle East, his own feelings on the war with Iraq, and Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. Here are some extended excerpts.
In the hours since we suspended military operations in the Kuwaiti theater of war, considerable progress has been made in moving towards a ceasefire and post-war planning. As our forces moved into Kuwait City, and as the faces of these jubilant Kuwaiti citizens have warmed our hearts,